Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be starting presently. I'm going to give it another couple of minutes to allow people to get in because sessions do tend to run long, not surprisingly, because there's some really interesting stuff going on, and we're conscious that people will be trying to rush between sessions. So we have 90 minutes for this really, I think, what is going to be a very, very interesting session. And so we have a little bit of time to spare, and I'm going to take advantage of that by giving people another few minutes just to get out of sessions and to come and join us. But rather than have you sitting there just waiting, I thought what I would do is just go through a little bit of the housekeeping for you before we formally begin the proceedings. You're aware, if you didn't come for the great debate, you're in the wrong place. This is the session which will be examining the challenges that we face over food security and climate change. How do we balance the two? And we have an extraordinarily varied and interesting panel of experts, and I use that word advisedly. They are all world experts on the subject. But you are part of this debate, and that is, I want to emphasize that we are really keen to have a proper interactive discussion throughout the session. We have a voting system, and I thought maybe I would explain that to you to begin with. You will have been handed these little voting things, and I just wanted to explain to you how to answer the questions. We will put up questions throughout the discussion. This is a little bit of a conceit. The intention really is to engage you, but we also think that it might actually produce useful information. We've tried to ask questions that are not too simplistic because we're aware that many of you are members of the community that thinks deeply about these issues. So we tried not to be simplistic with our questions. We tried to offer a range of options, and we're going to ask you to number them kind of 1 to 6, 1 to 4, whatever, in order of priority. And this system here, you press which question you think you should have first, you press that number, second, third, and so on. And the idea then is when you're finished to give them back, because we're not this is not a vast operation, and we don't want to be hit with a large bill at the end of it. So I would ask you, please do not leave with those response cards. They're of absolutely no use to anybody except the company who very kindly organized this for us. And so what we'll do now is we'll do the test question, and I know somebody is going to raise it. Please, sir, why doesn't it add up to 100%? But there, you've had the explanation there. So I'll ask you now, first of all, as I say, as the test question, to tell us where you're from. So if you would now press the appropriate response on your response card. And that's terrific. We're getting a very good response. Now, as I say, we think maybe we may get some useful information out of this at the end of the day, but if not, at least we'll have had some fun, folks. So there we are. That's it. That's extremely useful, and tells us immediately something about the makeup of this session. It looks like I don't really have to introduce myself to most of the people here. My name is Leo Enright. I'm a broadcaster. For most of my professional career, I've been a foreign correspondent, first for the Irish Broadcasting Service, RTE, and more recently for the BBC. Now, for the BBC, as you can imagine, being a foreign correspondent is a very exotic job. And my posting for most of my career with the BBC was in a country called Ireland. So my job was to explain the quirks and vagaries of Ireland to a British audience, and I can't say that it was very easy. So that's my background. I also have an interest. I broadcast regularly on space and science, and I'm a member of the governing body of the School of Cosmic Physics at the Dublin Institute for Advanced Studies. So I've always taken a keen interest in these areas, and we at the Institute for Advanced Studies, we engage in fundamental research. Much of it has relevance to the issues we're discussing today, particularly our geophysics section. So these are subjects, this is a subject matter that I have a keen interest in. Now the other thing to mention is Twitter. We are on Twitter, obviously. We have a Twitter desk who will be keeping us posted on the tweets that are coming in. Any responses yet? Yep. Okay, can we try and push up a couple of tweets there, just to as I say, we'll start the formal session in just a moment. But is there anything in particular that everyone's waiting? Amazing speakers, I absolutely agree. And the debate starts at 1:15. Well, in fact, it'll be starting just now, basically, to get us started. So we'll be going back to the tweet desk on a regular basis, and please do have your say. It's also helpful to me if you have a question or a comment about something that's been said. You don't just have to put up your hand and contribute. You can also, if you prefer, you want to do that, you can do it by tweeting it. And I'll be happy to put the question to the audience or to the panel as we see fit. So that's your hashtag, and please feel free to use it. Now, the intention is that the expert panel will join us in just a moment, but we felt we would begin this session, and we are now formally starting the session, by hearing from a group, a very special group, with an interest in this subject and who've been thinking about it carefully. I call them Generation 21. They are the people who will live their entire lives in the 21st century. They are the only people who will know people who will live in the 22nd century. So these people have a stake beyond anything we could have in the issues that we're about to discuss. They are the natives of the 21st century. They have known no other century. We, of course, every single person in this room is an immigrant. We came into this century with a great deal of baggage. So we felt that if we were to have a proper discussion and if we were to reflect the seriousness of the issues that we're debating, that we should first hear from the people who will be most affected, but not just that. These are the people who will make the policy decisions into the future that will decide the future of our planet. So they are an important group to hear from. So if you would please give a few moments to listen to the views of the people who will have to deal with the consequences of what we do and take up the baton after us.
Hi, I'm Sean and I'm from Dublin in Ireland.
Hi, my name is Polina and I'm from Samara in Russia.
I'm Roshan and I'm from England.
I'm Emlyn, born in Wexford, Ireland.
My name's Isabel and I'm from Ethiopia in Africa.
I'm Maciek and I'm from Poland.
Hi, I'm Zahid from Wexford.
My name is Chantal and my family is from Estonia.
I'm Aoife and I'm from England.
I'm Jessica from Wexford. There are 7 billion people in the world right now, this current moment in time. And there will be 10 billion people in 2050.
Global warming is basically selfishness because we're destroying a world that's not ours. So it's like if you borrow something and then break it and give it back.
Climate protection will be more important because, in fairness, climate gives us ability to produce food. Helping the ozone and feeding people are both very good choices. Like, they're two very important different things. Icebergs are melting, places are getting hotter and colder and all different things. But because my family do plant stuff, I think we're doing a pretty good job on that, and that we are helping.
We should increase the growth of food in wealthier countries, well, in Europe mostly, and grow more food in Africa, or maybe even export food to Africa.
I think I do have a minor solution for the meat problem, because you know, insects and worms, they have a lot of protein, and they're very, very easy to rear because of the very little food, and there's such an abundance of them. And you know, that's probably where the future is heading. Soon meat will be a treat for the rich.
It could be like science and what you do personally, because like if you switch off lights and you conserve energy and you help try and make people and be more energy efficient, and you don't leave things on standby, and you don't go out shopping when you still have a full fridge of things.
I think we should stop burning fossil fuels and get more nuclear power plants.
Petrol's going to run out in 2050, I think. So we're going to have to think of other, you know, fuels to use.
Important people can do big things because they have a lot more power than we do. But we can all do something small to help. If the world gets too hot, humans might be too hot and they might get extinct. But then we also need to have food, and that will keep us alive, not being extinct. So it sort of does worry me.
Okay, some very thoughtful contributions there from our first panel of experts. I'll now call on our second panel of experts to join me on the stage, and I'll introduce them once they've taken their seats. So if you would please join us on the stage, and if you'd give a warm welcome to our panel of experts, who will be here to guide us in our discussion, to offer thoughts and insights, and to help us essentially with the science of what we're about to discuss, the areas that we're going to deal with. So if you would take your seats, we'll begin the discussion. So beginning closest to me, Marion Julieu is the Chief Executive of France's National Institute for Agricultural Research, which is Europe's largest agricultural research agency. She was Director General of Food and Nutrition at the French Ministry of Agriculture, where she led the reorganization of that division, which is now focused very specifically on the quality and safety of agricultural products and food. Next is Professor Lynn Frewer, who holds the chair of Food Safety and Consumer Behavior at the Marketing and Consumer Behavior Group in
Wageningen, but I'm actually at
University. Sorry, I never spotted that. I should have. No, that's very amateur of me. At Wageningen University. Her research interests include the psychology of risk perception, public reactions to genetic modification, and other technologies. Next is Rajendra Pachuri, who has served as the chair of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, since 2002. You'll remember that it was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2007. He has also been the Director General of the Energy and Resources Institute, which is commonly known as TERI, a research and policy organization in India. He's chairman of the board of Columbia University's International Research Institute for Climate and Society, and he's head of the Yale Climate and Energy Institute. Next is Professor Louise Fresco of the University of Amsterdam, who's an expert on agriculture and sustainability. She's a former UN director who contributes to think tanks and advises academies in Europe and the United States. She writes on policy and economics for the Dutch paper NRC Handelsblad, and she's also, as it happens, a popular novelist. And finally, but certainly not least by any means, Professor Pam Ronald, Professor Pam Ronald, professor at the Department of Plant Pathology and the Genome Center at the University of California, Davis. She also serves as Director of Grass Genetics at the Joint Bioenergy Institute. Her laboratory has engineered rice for resistance to disease and tolerance to flooding. She and her colleagues were recipients of the US Department of Agriculture 2008 National Research Initiative Discovery Award for their work on rice. And she's an elected fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. She's written opinion pieces for the Boston Globe, The Economist, and the New York Times, and she is a blogger on National Geographic's excellent blog site, Science Blogs. So if you would please give a warm welcome to our panel. Now, to get us started, as I said, we are keen for discussion from the floor. So I'll ask for the house lights to come up so that we can hear contributions from the floor, and we'll begin with some thoughtful contributions from people who we've asked to outline their positions on these issues. We're breaking the session into two halves, as it were. The first module really is, we titled it, Will We Starve or Will We Burn? And it's basically outlining the problems that we face. And then the second module, after 2 o'clock, we'll be looking at who should take action, what are the policy initiatives that should be taken, and so on. So I'm keen for a free-flowing discussion, and we'll go where the discussion takes us. But to begin our discussion for us, I'm going to call on Oisin Coughlin, please. And, oh, sorry, I beg your pardon. I thought they already had a mic, so bear with us. Thanks, Oisin.
Good afternoon. Thanks, Leo. My name is Oisin Coughlin. I'm the director of Friends of the Earth Ireland, an organisation that campaigns for environmental justice and sustainability, and part of a global federation of 75 such organisations, mostly in the global south. So my initial point is this. There's a concerted effort here in Ireland to promote a narrative that increasing Irish food production is a vital contribution to global food security, and therefore any action to reduce climate-changing emissions here in Ireland should put no limit on the expansion of Irish agriculture or Irish agricultural emissions. In reality, of course, it's climate change that is one of the greatest threats to food security, not action to contain climate change. Other main causes of food insecurity are conflict, natural disasters, poverty, access to agricultural inputs, and good seeds for small farmers. A shortage of Irish agricultural produce is not now, never has been, and never will be a cause of global food insecurity. There's no shortage of food globally. The problem is not production, it's distribution. The 1 billion people who go hungry every day could be fed with just 3% of current world food supply. We in Ireland are not going to feed the world by increasing Irish beef and dairy production. In fact, we're not planning to. We're planning to feed the growing Chinese and Indian middle classes, not the hungry in Africa. We are already on a path to a 5 to 6 degree warmer world, when we know that a 4 degrees Celsius rise will mean agricultural yields decline for almost everything, and almost everywhere. The pursuit of agricultural production and expansion here in Europe is not part of the solution to food insecurity globally. Rather, it's a cause of climate change and a cause of food insecurity. Thanks.
Okay, thanks very much. And I'll also call on Michael Barry, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Michael Barry. I work for the food and drink industry in Ireland with a specific responsibility for the primary agricultural sector. Will we starve or will we burn? Well, of course, neither is an acceptable or an appealing outcome, is it? Here in Ireland, we're lucky to have a very good soil and climate balance that enables us to produce food in perhaps one of the most sustainable manners globally. Our dairy and meat is produced on grass-based farms, family farms, which is probably the idyllic way of producing food. But tackling climate change is something that we all have got to address. even for those of us that are fortunate enough to operate in an environment as favourable for food production as this. But this is a debate about people, and people in a world that is expanding rapidly, and that poses a challenge. We must not create a policy that sends hunger against environment, people versus planet, because this in itself would not be sustainable. Our challenge is to produce more food in a more sustainable manner in the most sustainable regions of the world, so that our impact on the climate is minimized. Policy is not sustainable when it restricts food production in the most sustainable regions of the world, especially when different countries have different policies on climate change. Then restricting the production of sustainable food transfers the production of that food to regions where sustainability is not a priority. The focus, therefore, must be on sustainable food production in sustainable regions, and not simply on the attainment of national political targets. While Ireland enjoys one of the most sustainable systems of agriculture, our farmers are currently being advised on how to produce that food more sustainably. Currently, 33,000 Irish farmers are being independently audited against sustainability credentials, and we will expand that to encompass all farmers throughout the country. That's our vision of sustainable food production, and we hope you can support us in this journey to make sure that we all neither starve nor burn.
Okay, Michael, thank you very much. Now, you, the audience, get your chance to have your first say, as it were. We're going to begin our poll of the audience, and we're going to start by asking you a straightforward question. Would you rank how you would eradicate hunger and reduce climate change? So basically, if you think number 4 is your highest priority, you key that in first. If you think number 2 is your second, you put that in second, and so on. That should be fairly straightforward for you, and I'll ask you now to respond to that as the polling is open. And once we've done that, I'll be asking the expert panel to begin introducing us to the science behind the issues that we've already heard from. And I look forward to hearing contributions. I'll be keen for each of them to make a general opening statement at some stage during the proceedings, but they'll be chipping in with insight as we proceed, and I'll be asking them to specifically respond to issues as they get raised. So now that is very interesting indeed. I hope the panelists can see that. Marion, you're having trouble seeing it, are you? Yeah, it's all right. It's all right. Yeah, sorry about that now. Okay, now that is really interesting, and what is even going to be more interesting, because we've got such an interesting balance between the two, I think it'll be interesting to see how that compares at the end of our discussion, because I will ask the same question at the end of our debate. So that's I think will produce some. It'll be very interesting to see the changes. Now, the second question. Do you think agriculture is decreasing its greenhouse gas emissions effectively? And again, in this case, you've just 3 answers, so I'll ask you to vote now, as it were. Okay, well, there's a clear view that agriculture is sitting on the fence on that issue. So I'll turn now to the expert panel and see who wants to kick off the discussion. Anyone offering to make some opening comments and remarks? I'll call on Dr. Pachuri first.
Well, I must say the audience has been profound, and I was particularly happy to see the response to the first set of issues that were raised, because it's entirely correct. There is no silver bullet in dealing with this problem. In order to bring about an improvement in agriculture, both in terms of yields and productivity, but also in respect of reducing emissions of greenhouse gases, we need a whole range of initiatives that are going to make agriculture far more responsible. And here we must accept the fact that we are dealing with a globe where there are enormous disparities. It's not just enough to produce food in the aggregate, and I think the point was put across when it was said that there's enough for everyone. The problem is one of distribution. But we must realize that the impacts of climate change on some of the poorest agricultural workers, landowners, is going to be particularly serious. And I want to mention one particular number which would be of some significance in this regard. In Africa, we have projected in the fourth assessment report of the IPCC that as early as 2020, there are some countries that would see a decline in agricultural yields of up to 50% on account of climate change and climate variability. Now, these are farmers who are not selling to the market. The bulk of them are producing essentially to feed themselves and their families. A study in Kenya, for instance, has found that there are only 36% of the farmers who are actually selling their produce, and 20% of them account for the bulk of what is being sold. So in other words, the large majority of farmers in that country, as is the case in many other parts of Africa, are producing food only for themselves. And therefore, if we produce more in any other part of the world, we'll also have to ensure that people who are the poorest inhabitants of this planet have enough income, enough resources to be able to buy that food from the global market. So the point I'd like to make is you really need a whole range of inputs to bring about improvements in agriculture. And here, may I say, one absolutely vital input is going to be affected by the impacts of climate change. And let me just give you two examples. Firstly, in most of the mountain areas, we know that in general, the glaciers are melting very rapidly. Now, when that happens, it has major implications downstream. There's a large number of farmers who are dependent on water supply, which is the result of snow melt, ice melt from the glaciers. They are going to be affected, generally in an adverse direction. The other point I'd like to make is we already have a planet which is water stressed. And here, may I give you the example of Africa, and then I'll stop. We have projected that by 2020, we would have about 75 to 250 million people in Africa living in a state of water stress. So here is a vital input which is required for agriculture, which is going to be affected by the impacts of climate change. So while, of course, we must adapt to these impacts, I think globally it is essential for us to see that we stabilize the concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, which requires very rapid reduction in emissions. And therefore, this is a global responsibility which covers every sector of the economy, including agriculture. So I'll stop here, and I hope I'll have an opportunity to say more on the subject later. Thank you.
Luis Fresco, you've written very directly about all of these issues. You're well known for your direct comments on them. Do you think that Oisin Coughlin was right when he said that the problem is not food production?
Well, I think this is the problem that we always have. Yes, there is a problem of distribution, definitely. But the areas where people are hungry are indeed areas of poverty, areas where income is not enough. But you can't solve that by producing food just anywhere. Most of the cereals that are the staple foods for people in poor countries have to be produced more or less locally. In fact, only 10 to 12% of the cereals come to the world market. That's the one side of the story. On the other hand, we know that from an ecological point of view, food has to be produced there where it can best be produced, under the most favorable circumstances, because if you don't do that, maintaining low productivity in poor countries often always means low yields and always means an environmental disaster. to be provocative as I usually am, for those of you who don't know me, let me say that one of the most destructive ways of using the land is using tropical soils for annual crops with heavy rainfall and no fertilizer. That is a recipe for disaster. So what we need is intensification, and you cannot intensify everywhere. And I think the question was very seriously and very well put. Should Ireland or should Europe produce a surplus to feed the rest of the world? Yes, for some things we need to do it, but the devil is in the details. Yes, perhaps for some products that cannot be produced better elsewhere, and think of milk products, for example. That's a good example where Ireland and some other countries have a comparative advantage over many other countries in the world, and hence there, with the guarantees for food safety, that's probably a very good option. We cannot produce milk under the same favorable conditions in many parts of the world. But for cereals, I make an exception. I think the bulk of the rice should be produced in Asia, where the bulk of the eaters are. So intensification is a matter of location, it's a matter of smart solutions, and that's, by the way, why I like this comment from one of the children about insects so much. Because indeed, looking towards other sources of protein, and whether it's algae or insects or something else that can replace some of the animal proteins, is indeed the way forward. So apart from intensification, we definitely also need smart solutions, and we need research.
Okay, Marion Juliou, could I bring you in here, because you've obviously, from your experience as a public servant working with agriculture, we heard the comment made about sustainability and the sustainability of Irish farming there from Michael Barry. He was placing great emphasis from an Irish point of view on this. What does the science say? I mean, is that one of the key issues we need to be addressing?
Yes, of course. I mean, obviously, you know, all what the children that have said is quite interesting. I mean, they have common sense, if I may say so. In all their remarks, you see things that are very deep. And in fact, when you look at the situation, you know that with a small increase in the yields, for instance, of wheat, because the three cereals that Louise was mentioning, I mean, wheat, rice, and maize, are the basis of the food in the world. And of course, if you increase the yield, at the moment it's plus 1%, the increase in the yields. But now you know that climate change makes it difficult to increase quickly. I mean, there is a kind of plateau in the yields of the cereals because of climate change. So we need research so that we get a better increase. And in fact, 1.7% is enough to feed the world, if you look at projections of the population. So to increase from 1% to 1.7%, it supposes to adapt, for instance, the genetics of the cereals to the new conditions. So should it be the variability of the weather? How do you build resilience, plants that accept changes, I mean heat shocks or heat waves, that resist to such dramatic situations? When you remember about the spring in UK, was it last year? When you remember about the Russia problem in 2010, when you remember about, well, you can take many examples in Europe in 2003, in Australia and so on. In many parts of the world, you had very big problems of non-adaptation of the crops to the new conditions of weather. And there you have to invent. You have to select breeds. You have to find in the world, in the diversity, the plants that are adapted to the new conditions. You have then to have more robust systems of for the plants or for the animals. And then, yes, you need a lot of innovations, because the conditions now are not the conditions that were in the previous years when we succeeded in what I should call the green revolution. Yes, we have to innovate a lot. So research is necessary for that, for monitoring, for innovation, for adaptation, for mitigation. Yes, I think we have very practical solution to propose to those children.
Well, Pam Ronald, I mean, you're obviously working in this field. Is science keeping up? Is it keeping pace with the requirements of agriculture? And is it able to address these complex interactions between farming and climate change with perhaps the new technologies and the new techniques, or do you think that science is lagging behind what we need as a population?
Well, I absolutely agree that research is very important, and as some of the speakers have said, technologies are not a silver bullet. However, improved technologies can have a tremendous impact on the lives of small farmers. And this is especially true in the face of global climate change. And I can give you an example of a project that I was fortunate to be involved in. So when we think of climate change, often we think of droughts and heat, but also there are changes in precipitation and increased flooding in some parts of the world. And this is especially a serious situation in Asia, South and Southeast Asia, where 25% of the world's rice is grown. And in those regions, every year there have been tremendous flooding, and in fact, the last few years, the flooding has increased. And this is very damaging for the rice crop because although rice does grow in water, if it's completely submerged for more than 3 days, the rice will die. And so many years ago, about 50 years ago, research geneticists identified an ancient variety of rice that was very tolerant of flooding. It was incredible. It could stay underwater for 2 weeks, and then when the floods subsided, it could survive. However, this variety was essentially not edible. And so working together, teams of geneticists and breeders were able to isolate the gene controlling this submergence tolerance and bring it into varieties that are favored by farmers in Bangladesh and India and other parts of the world. The International Rice Research Institute has released 5 or 6 varieties now carrying this gene for submergence called sub-1. And it's having very tremendous effects where the yields are 3 to 5-fold in conditions of flooding, which are occurring every year. And these are farmers with very little money. They're living on less than $1 a day. So when they see this tremendous increase on yield on the same amount of land, it has a dramatic impact on those farmers' lives. Last year, 1 million farmers grew that rice. So these are simple technologies that can have a tremendous impact on the lives of farmers. And we're going to see a lot more of that. And just to give you an example of how fast paced genetic research is moving, is in the year 2000, we had the first sequence of a plant genome. It's a small little weed called Arabidopsis. Nobody eats it, but it's a model genome. It grows and the plant grows very quickly. It cost quite a bit of money. It took 7 years, something like $500,000, and many, many people worked on this project. The same project is expected to be completed next year in 2 to 3 minutes at a cost of $99. And now we not only have the Arabidopsis genome, we have the rice genome, the maize genome. People are working on the wheat genome. We have the tomato genome. And not only do we have a single genome, but we have genomes for many different varieties of plants. So geneticists can now go in to those genomes and fish out genes that have not been used before to try to develop plants that can adapt to climate change. So I think there are tremendous developments in research and tremendous opportunities, and certainly we need to invest in those technologies to bring about a sustainable intensification.
Okay, I'm going to go to Lynn Frewer in just a second, but we're getting lots of tweets in, very busy in the Twitter sphere. We've had a comment from Stephen Van Duyn, who says that there is no food problem, there's a lack of will, it's a distribution problem, he maintains, and I think we might have a further discussion about that in a moment. We got a nice SMS message actually from Northern Ireland. Somebody was watching online who said they thought having the kids at the start was great, so thank you very much for that comment, we appreciate it. And we've also got a comment in from the apple farmer, a tweet. He's one of the farmers, or she maybe, no, it's a he, I believe, it's Cornelius Trass is his name. He says he's one of the, the farmers being audited against sustainability criteria. He says it's a good way to start, but way too simplistic. and much more is needed. I think later in the conversation we should definitely look at these policy options and how they should be implemented. But Lynn, I'm just a bit curious about this whole, we're talking a lot about the farmers, and yet the children seem to think personal responsibility and the consumer were just as important. I mean...
I'd actually like to pick up on the statement from, is it Oisin Coghlan? From Friends of the Earth. And you said there's no shortage of food globally. The problem is not production, it's distribution. And that was also the comment on the Twitter feed there. Now, certainly in developed countries, we know that between 30 and 40% of food that's taken into the household is wasted. If you look at the impact of that over the developed world, that's an enormous loss of calories. If you also factor in the biggest issue, one of the biggest issues in terms of the disease burden globally, particularly in European countries, developed countries, but also in the emerging economies, is related to overnutrition, obesity, getting too many calories. It's quite clear that there is a distribution problem. I'm not arguing that distribution alone will solve the problems of food security. More needs to be done. We have a growing population, we have shifts in consumption preferences. In the emerging economies, more people are looking to the social norm that's been established in the West for high meat consumption, which is why we're trying to produce more meat to feed those populations. One solution is to look at not only increasing food production, but also to change the kind of norms that we adopt in terms of food choice, how we treasure and nurture the food that we have, and also to pick up on some of the things that the other speakers have said, to ensure that food is grown close to the point of consumption, but that also doesn't interfere with the global economy in terms of destroying the cash crops that many developing countries are also dependent on. So I think the point I'd like to make is that this is not a unidisciplinary problem that can be solved using a quick technological fix. It requires cooperation between consumers, citizens, scientists, and the policy community to develop a way forward. And that involves talking to each other. I'm sure we'll come back to it later, but there are also cases where technology has been applied very successfully. I raised the issue, for example, of genetically modified rabbits, which have been used not in the context of food security, but to produce monoclonal antibodies to treat cancer. There's broad societal approval for this and broad consumer acceptance if we treat patients as the end consumer of that product. But other cases, the EnviroPig, a genetically modified pig in Canada that was bred to produce less phosphate in its feces and thereby improve the environment of the existing intense sustainable production system. There was no consumer demand for the product, there was no commercial trajectory, commercialization trajectory, and the last of those animals, I believe, was put down on the 22nd of June, so not very long ago.
China has taken up those animals, so
okay. That's an interesting development. In terms...
Sorry, Louise, could you repeat that? We hadn't got you on mic at the time.
Okay, I was just saying this same development and same research has been taken up or developed independently in part by China, where it is a success and where there is a demand. So the answer there is probably that the solutions, again, have to be tailor-made.
But I think that's exactly the case that I'm making. One unitary solution will not fit the kind of requirements of different communities and different cultures. Everybody has different preferences, for engaging in a technology, using a technology in different ways. And I think that has to be recognised, perhaps, when we come to the policy discussion later on today.
Yeah, I think Marion wanted to come in there as well.
Yes, it was, does it work? Yes. It was just a short remark on the local production. I mean, obviously, yes, we need to think about local production, but sometimes the optimum is not local production. Even if you look at the environmental cycle, and I come back to the example of the milk that Louise gave previously, and sometimes if you need to heat to get tomatoes in a country, then it is better for the environment to ship the products from elsewhere. And I think that contrary to what we think naturally, we have to be careful that trade still exists in the food sector, because when there will be climatic problems, of course, trade could be a way to balance the production. I mean, a way to ensure, to secure the production. So yes, for local production, of course, because it's local development. But we have to be very careful not to say it's the universal solution as well.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. I live in California's Central Valley, which produces half the fruits and vegetables and nuts in the entire United States. So it's easy for us to eat locally. My husband is a farmer, an organic farmer, so it's especially easy for me, but that's not the case of my friends in Wyoming in the winter. So if they're going to have a healthy eating style, they either need to work very hard to can and dry fruit, which few people do anymore, or they're going to be importing those fruits and vegetables from other parts of the world.
Okay, I'm going to open it up. We're going to continue this discussion as free-flowing as we can make it. And I'd like to involve you on the floor with this. Could I make just a couple of comments before I start calling speakers from the floor? Would you please be brief? Because we want to give everybody an opportunity to engage. Would you please stick with the issues that we're discussing? And please use the experts that we have here to discuss the science. If you have a question about science, or you feel there's an issue that we haven't raised adequately, feel free to raise that point, but I'd ask you to do so briefly and to do it, if you can, in the form of a question that the science experts that we have here can give us the benefit of the scientific state of knowledge in these matters. And if you have just a general comment, you're welcome to, but keep it brief, to the point, and obviously we expect respect for everybody in the room. This gentleman here.
My name is Ratan Lal. I'm Professor of Soil Science at Ohio State. And the question of climate affecting food production. I think it's perhaps I'm asking Dr. Pachauri, is it possible to separate soil degradation, for example, from climate impact? If the soil was not degraded, it was more resilient to climate, perhaps the food production impact of harsh climate could be less. Also, the green revolution of the 60s and 70s is pretty stagnating now because it was seed-based rather than soil-based.
No, I think that's a very relevant question. But may I say that with the impacts of climate change, soil conditions are likely to worsen. And the point I'd like to emphasize is that we're not dealing with a static situation. I think it's high time the global system starts looking at the kinds of challenges we're going to have to meet in the future. For instance, surely with high precipitation levels, extreme precipitation levels, which we know are going to increase in intensity and frequency, soil erosion will only become much worse. And I think that's something we have to take into account. I also want to highlight the fact that you would find with heat waves, soil conditions will worsen, and therefore it's likely that even the moisture that's retained in the soil will reduce over a period of time. In general, what I'd like to submit is that we have really not paid enough attention. I mean, since you raised the issue of the Green Revolution, we have not really looked at priorities by which we might be able to deal with the problem of rain-fed agriculture and the challenges that it's going to face in the future. And certainly, maintaining healthy soil conditions is an extremely important part of it. And you're right, I think by this emphasis on improved seed varieties and not looking at what we are going to do with soil conditions, we have perhaps in some parts of the world worsened conditions as far as the soil is concerned. And this is going to cost us dearly in the future. This has also led to deterioration of groundwater because of the leaching that takes place with excessive fertilizer use, pesticides, and so on and so forth. So I think good practice is going to be extremely important, but let me end by saying that we need to start looking at the impacts of climate change in the future, and certainly with an increase in heat waves, with an increase in salinity in several parts of the world due to sea level rise, and certainly with extreme precipitation events becoming more intense, more frequent, we will be dealing with situations that are far worse than what we have today. And these, unfortunately, will be dealt with and will actually impact on some of the poorest people and the poorest communities in the world. So we need to focus on these in our research and development and intellectual efforts.
Okay, Marion, did you have another comment to make there?
Yes, I'm sure that you know about those studies about the fact that the yields of cereals are plateauing now. And there are analyses trying to understand the causes of this change, this plateau. And obviously, the inadaptation of the genetics, the physiology of the plants during some special time when you have drought, during a few days when the biology of the plant needed water or things like that are elements of the plateau. So it's a mixture. Of course, as you said before, it's not a silver bullet. I mean, it's a mixture of soil condition, but plant conditions, biology, and non-adaptation to those new conditions of variability of the climate and drought when you need water and so on. So it's not only soil, but soil plus genetic plus systems plus resilience plus pathogens and so on, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to take 3 questions in a row or 3 comments in a row. I'm going to start with this gentleman in the middle here, number 1, mic number 1.
Brendan Dunleavy, agricultural consultant and journalist. One of the elephants in the room today, I think, is our over-dependence on what I might loosely call the market, and it's specifically its ability to manage agricultural production and match it with food needs and environmental priorities. This clearly has failed. As an example of that, as we were talking here this week, some of the most efficient dairy farmers in the UK were spilling their milk on the streets of London because they couldn't get the bare cost of production from the supermarkets. This is a big scandal, and I'd like the panel's view. Thank you.
Excellent. Yeah, very, very good question. That was raised at our debate yesterday, last night in the RDS as well. I'm going to take a comment over here, number 4, microphone number 4.
Should commoditization of food be better controlled? Is it desirable even?
Okay, we'll put that to the panel in a moment, and I'm just going to take one more question here from the front, microphone number 5.
I would like to comment, actually, not only question, but comment. Both yellow pictures on the page. It is an estimation that the production of food must be 70% more to the year 2050. If you compare the population now and 2050, I don't believe that this is correct estimation. This is based on the same mistake which was done by Rome Club at the 70s, when they made linear extrapolation. Linear extrapolation is deadly dangerous for science. This is point number 1. Point number 2 is it is considered as a given issue that the emission inevitably make irreversible changes of climate. This is an object of debate at most. This is not something scientifically established. At least I have the right to speak on behalf of very many physicists who completely disagree with this point of view. On the other hand, one must have in mind that in a small country such as Israel, with a population of 7 million, where there is no problem of increasing heat. It is desert, and still the crop is more than in Holland. So the problem is not only in the temperature of the surrounding, but also in the technology, how the crop is growing. I can give you one important figure. An Israeli cow gives 1 ton of milk per month without any ability to walk and to pick up grass all around. So the problem is technology and development of genetics and so on and so forth. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, thank you very much. A very interesting contribution there, and that actually ties in with the tweet we got from Pat O'Keefe of the Irish Farmers Journal. He was making the point in his tweet that technical efficiency at farm level is a key way to reduce emissions per unit of farm output. So it ties in somewhat with the comment you're making. Would somebody like to pick up on that last comment, and then we'll go back to the marketing issues? Yep, Marion?
Yes, of course, you're right that if you say we need 70% to feed the world in 2050, it depends on the hypothesis. And we have made a work that is called Agrimonde with different hypotheses about the food diet, what you were saying. That is to say, if you imagine the people eat on the, let's say, the American diet, then you need to increase very quickly. If you imagine that the people eat, well, 2,200 calories, what average French people eat, and so you need 3,000 kilocalories per day to eat 2,200, then you don't need the same agricultural production. And if you look at those different hypotheses, in one of them you need 30% of increase of agricultural production, on the other one you need 80% of increase. And then you have other hypotheses about the animal product transition. You have hypotheses about the non-food use of renewable carbon, because, of course, maybe we will need a lot of plant carbon for non-food uses. So you have a set of hypotheses. But, in fact, when you look at the tendency, anyway, you need to increase the food production and you need to increase the agricultural production under climate change conditions. So you need to innovate and you need new pathways to do that. So you need, in fact, to invest.
I'll take a quick comment from Dr. Pachauri as well on this.
Just a quick response. I'm a great admirer of Israeli agriculture and what they've been able to achieve under very harsh and difficult conditions. But let me emphasize, when you're dealing with some of the least developed countries in the world, where you have no road connectivity, you have absolutely no income that can be allocated for anything other than just barest existence, when you have infrastructure which is extremely run down, if at all existent, I think you have to look at agriculture within a larger context of economic development. And there are no facile or simple solutions. And I think you have to take a holistic approach. If you don't ensure that all the inputs required for bringing about technological upgradation are available, then clearly you're not going to be able to access technology. So I think it's not a facile solution. We really need to look at the entirety of the problem, and we have to take into account how these societies are being impacted by climate change in a variety of ways, which I don't have to go into.
Okay, I'd like to move on just to those other 2 points that were made. Louise, did you want to pick up on those? Maybe this is the madness of the market and also the commoditization of food. I mean, are these, would you like to take a crack at those?
I think there is something very important that links the debate on intensification and the market, and that is that the key issue to me is not even productivity or technology or what have you, but it's on the one hand to get a market that functions in such a way that farmers actually can get a decent living out of being a farmer. And my main concern is that young people don't want to become farmers anymore, and I'm sure this is an issue in Ireland as well. Unless we increase productivity at the farm level and have society change its attitude so that people can be proud again of food and respect food and eat it in such a way that they're conscious of what they're doing and conscious of how they buy, we cannot have a future of farming. And so the market is not a panacea, it's not going to solve things, but without a market, we will not have a decent farming and a decent standard of living. I'm afraid that a lot of the so-called subsistence farmers actually are doomed in a way that their children will not want to be farmers. They go to the cities. The only way to solve that is to help them to make a quantum jump to become an entrepreneurial farmer, to have technology so that they don't have to bend over 75,000 times to plant a hectare of rice, for example, but to have some light mechanization or some adaptive way of increasing their productivities, of decreasing the impact on the environment, and be able to produce a surplus for the markets. Because in the end, you know, we're talking about 60 or even perhaps 65% of people who will live in cities. They will need farmers who produce a surplus, and we cannot get farmers who produce a surplus unless we have a well-functioning market where the price of food takes into account the kinds of impacts the food has on the environment, but also where it allows for a decent living for young farmers who will take up this profession. If there are no young farmers, there's not going to be food production.
Okay, well, let's hear from a farmer, will we? I think it's time we heard from a farmer. Edward Ouko is a small holder in Kenya. He's also coordinator of a community project on sustainable food production. And we've asked him to talk a bit about food security and climate change and what it means to farmers on the ground.
I'm Eddie Ouko. I'm a farmer who is coming from Kisumu, which is in Kenya, Western Kenya province. I plant different types of crops. One of them is sorghum, maize, beans, watermelon, butternuts, onions, and also green gram. I'm food secure. I'm food secure in that I have enough to sell and I have enough to eat for the whole year. Now, through all this, I've managed to sustain my life better. Now, the excess produce which I get from the farm, I sell them, and the sales from the products, I take my children to schools. And we also have a very harmonious life because we live together. Food security means that, food insecurity means that you don't have enough to eat. You walk here and there, going searching for food. Other people also even go and work in other people's farms so that they could also get enough something to eat. It has also even separated the families whereby you find that the couples sometimes they worked for other people to be paid so that they got enough food. Children are also even dropping from school. Prices of the commodities are all very expensive. If you go to the market, the supply is not there because the market is not supplied enough with some good commodities. So we are encouraging the farmers, I as a farmer, to be a role model so that we work on this to get enough food for our community. Climate change is a critical issue in this our society. Everyone now understands what climate change is, because the production of what we used to have has really declined. The fruits which we used to have, some of them, they are not there. Birds which used to also be there have migrated to other areas. Crop which we used to even to harvest have now no longer used because the rainfall pattern has really changed. Now, there are some other approaches which we are now trying to use so that we can address the issue of climate change. One of them is water harvesting, whereby we can also even store water for future use. We also have to plant the early maturing crops, which can also go with the rainfall pattern. We are also trying to plant the type of the trees like rapid mangoes, which can take a very short time to be harvested. Also, we plant the crops which are also disease-free, which can also not be affected with the rainfall pattern or the issue of the climate change. So through this, we are now planning to have reduced the lifespan of the crops by adoption of new technology, which is really helping the farmer to improve their life. Another way through which we use to help in the climate change is by planting the trees. We plant these trees which are also adaptable to this type of climate. The trees we plant so that they can also attract rainfall. We can also even use them for building houses in the future. We can also even plant the fruit trees, which we can also even get fruits in the future. The trees also protect the farms, that is, they act as crop covers. They also even in conserving soil conservation in our farms. They also even beautify the environment. So trees is a wonderful project. Climate change needs a combined teamwork. This is by farmers, other stakeholders, other partner organizations, scientists, and other partners. Now to the farmers. Farmers should also be supported through new inventions of new technologies which can change their lifestyle. Farmers should also be guided on very particular diseases which can also even affect their crops. Scientists should become on board. Other partners like the government ministries need also to expose the farmers to see more new technologies on what they can also achieve and also change their lifestyle. And the Europe countries need also to come up with new technologies which are also achievable, and also some other technical machineries which can also save the farmers from tedious work.
Okay, our thanks to Eddie speaking to us from Kenya. I'm going to move on back onto the floor now and take some questions. I think Duncan Stewart was going to, had a comment he wanted to make there earlier, so I'll invite him. And as we move, Duncan and everybody else, if I could ask you also when you speak to us, but also if you would speak to the audience at the back as well. And the purpose of that is that with the cameras are feeding this out to our audience internationally, and I'd like them to see more than the back of your head, basically. So if I could ask people also to try and talk towards the back as well as the front so that they take in everybody. But Duncan, go ahead.
Thank you, and it's a great pleasure to have, and an honour to be able to speak at this very, very important conference and have such an eminent panel of speakers. What I want to say, my name is Duncan Stewart, and I'm a TV producer, and I want to kind of just talk, first of all, about the overview of the issues that we face, and then look at the challenges and how we're going to really address them. When we look at the planet, we're now kind of facing, we're on a trajectory of probably 6 degrees Celsius of change in this century, unless dramatic changes happen. And we know that food production is going to have to increase probably 70%, it could be 100% by 2050 as the population grows to possibly 9 to 10 billion by 2050. That huge increase in population needs to be fed. But on the other side, climate change is going to grow, and the implications of it are going to get very serious. And we see the other stresses like water and biodiversity loss and resource depletion, and all of these combined together, it makes the challenge more and more great. And when you look at the synergies between all of these interactions, between the various pressures, one has to ask the question, can we sustain this planet to the year 2050? Are we facing major risks that we will not be able to keep going without some major collapses occurring within that time? So we need the scientists, all of you on the panel, and all the scientists that are here today, to take this issue to the public, because we can no longer trust global governments to act on these issues. We've waited 20 years and governments have failed us. And we need to now know that citizens need to take actions on behalf of their children so that we can face these issues squarely and face up to the consequences and make the transformation that we're going to need that is so urgently required of all of us. So I would ask all of the scientists to kind of engage the public more. We need scientists, and we need the consensus of scientists, the peer-reviewed science, to be presented to the people of this world in all communities so that they can understand the risks and the threats and the pressures that we face, and also know that there are solutions to these if we make the transformation that we need to make. So I would ask the science community, could you please bring these issues squarely to the public and communicate them well in a compelling way that we can make the big adjustments that we need to make? Because otherwise, our children's future and all the other species and those in the developing world, we're putting all of them at risk in terms of their future. So thank you.
Okay, I'll take one more comment and then we'll go back to the panel. My plan is to finish on time. We'll be doing another bit of voting shortly, but I will end at 2:45. So we're going to hear one more comment from the floor. We'll do a quick vote, and then I'll invite the panel to give closing statements, and then we'll see how your views have changed at the end. So one last comment from the floor.
Thank you, Leo. Owen Ryan is my name, from the climate policy side of the Department of the Environment, Community and Local Government. And on two key issues, such as climate change and global food security, issues of such critical global importance, an immediate question from a policy perspective is whether we have the balance right. This is the very practical side of the debate in terms of effective action now and in the long term. In order to arrive at a balanced policy response, we must of course be clear on the challenges presented by the individual issues and the extent to which they interact or overlap. Is our recognition and understanding of the relationship and overlap adequately developed to support a full and balanced policy response? The 1992 Convention requires the policy response to climate change to ensure that food production is not threatened. The Kyoto Protocol, however, makes no distinction in terms of where the mitigation is to be achieved. Some would argue that the atmosphere sees no difference, so why make a distinction? It is an interesting point, but is it an adequate and acceptable response to the question of balance? There are intrinsic differences between the sectors covered by the Kyoto Protocol, and in terms of food production, agriculture has unique features. Meat and rice production generate significant greenhouse gas emissions, but they are two of the staple foods in the world. So, in the next steps to achieve the ultimate objective of the 1992 Convention, do we need a more refined approach to sectoral emissions? If so, what approach might be best for the agriculture sector? And I'm not just talking about the sector as currently reflected in Annex A of the Kyoto Protocol, but the sector as a whole, livestock and land. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much indeed, Owen. Okay, let's vote again. We've one final question for you, and it's up on the screen, on your screen now, if you use your little voting gizmos to rank the effectiveness of policy tools to reduce agricultural emissions. If you would now choose, make your choice on what you think are the most important of those. It's a bit more A bit more complicated than the earlier ones. You might want to spend a moment thinking about it. And while you are thinking about it, we're going to look in this final section of our discussion at the policy options. More generally, I'll ask the experts to give their perspective on what we can do about it. We're getting plenty of suggestions on Twitter. Valdemar Ring Dal has tweeted in and has a very simple solution. He or she says, let's scrap the cap. We have another comment from at C. Austinberg, who has a question for the panel, again a policy question, which I'll ask them to address, and that is, do we need national climate change laws to combat climate change in the face of increasing demand for food production? So I'm sure the panel will be happy to comment on that. Polling is just finishing now, so I'd ask you, if you haven't finished up your voting, and there we go. Again, and this goes back to the comment that Dr. Pachuri made at the very beginning, that we're seeing an audience that are looking at these things and saying, look, there's a mixture of solutions that we have to look at. We kind of expected that, and we were curious to see would anything actually come out startlingly ahead of anything else. And I think it's interesting that, within the margin, I'm not sure what the margin of error is on this vote. We're not being very scientific if we don't give you a margin of error, but I guess it's small. So it's quite interesting that there are relatively there's relatively little difference in your views on which are the more important. Okay, so based on that series of questions, but more generally on the policy thing, if I could ask our panelists to wind up with their own perspective on the discussion that we've had, and particularly if I could ask you to address the issue of, what should we do, and even more importantly, who should be doing it to actually achieve some change. So Marian, maybe I'll ask you to begin.
Yes, well, a lot of important issues have been raised. I would say first, yes, we have to inform the citizens as much as possible, and I suppose that Dr. Pachuri will come back to that. But if I give you an example, we have a joint programming initiative with 21 countries to join our research effort, and some of you are members of the initiative. And in fact, we have built a stakeholder board so that they ask us the questions they want to see addressed by the research initiative, and on reverse we give the information, and I agree that citizen information is very important, at least for two reasons. First, the citizen can act. I mean, the waste, obviously, they can reduce the waste personally, and then they can influence, of course, the government action and the general action. And if I come back to what research, the win-win solution of research, I think at least research can open three kinds of doors. Monitoring, if we look at volatility of the prices because of big increases in speculations and because people are not informed on the state of the markets, then global monitoring is very important. And you can, for instance, give the Mars project by GRC that forecasts what will be the quantity of production. So for monitoring, it's very important. In Meteo as well, to improve the forecast capacity in long-term perspective. Mitigation, we have very good examples of what we could do to improve mitigation. I mean, there are plants with microbes around their roots that are able to stop the process of nitrification. Then you stop the emission of N2O. I mean, and it's a dream for scientists to be able to imitate that kind of a process that happens in some very special conditions. Then if I take the example of adaptation, obviously at the moment our systems are not adapted to the new conditions of variability and increase. And so we should think new systems, more robust and adapted to those variations. So yes, we have solutions now, and we have solutions to prepare for the future. And I will make 1 minute or 1 second about the GPA to say that it is very important. You know, it's not competitive research, it's pre-competitive research. We all need to join our efforts so that we go quicker and we are more efficient in research, in innovation, and in communication. And so joint programming initiative for me is a very good solution at European level, at international level, between the North and the South, and we need to work together.
Okay, Lynn?
Well, first of all, I'd just like to pick up on this question of policy translation. We know where there are a lot of problems. Consumer behavior is one of those problems. But it's actually developing approaches to get people to change their behavior. So awareness by itself is not enough. We need to put into place mechanisms which will encourage sustainable consumption. And I guess that extends beyond simply food consumption, but to other areas of consumption. I'd just also like to pick up the issue of the insect proteins. Now, this is a wonderful technology, but clearly not equally acceptable in different parts of the world. We know, I've done a straw poll here at UCD with the academic staff, and responses varied from mild curiosity to total horror that these proteins could enter the human food chain. Whereas in other countries like Thailand, if you look on the internet, you can order a plate of insect hors d'oeuvre, and at the moment they can still, I think, be flown into Europe. So I'm a little bit disappointed that we didn't have those for lunch. But harmonizing these different policy initiatives to deliver a package that will make a real difference to global food security is what's needed. And I think initiatives like the GPI are a good start, but that needs to be done as a global issue to make sure that all policy activities are joined together to deliver something that's going to benefit us all by next year, let alone the year 2050.
Okay, Rajendra?
Well, I think there are no simple answers, but I'm really happy that we're carrying out this debate, and we really need many more such initiatives whereby the public gets focused on some of the challenges we're going to face. But let me just mention a few things that I think need to be considered very seriously. A carbon tax. This is something that in the fourth assessment report of the IPCC we clearly stated could be a very effective way of bringing about mitigation of emissions of greenhouse gases across the board. Now, agriculture, we know, is a major source of emissions where there are improvements that are possible, and perhaps taxation would be one means by which you can initiate research and development, bring about innovation that will make a difference. I agree entirely with the voting on research and development. I think agriculture certainly needs much more R&D, and I would say that there are two aspects that have to be taken into account in any R&D plans that we develop. Firstly, it should be future-oriented. We are really going to be dealing with challenges that don't exist today or which will get intensified tomorrow. We're also dealing with a whole range of socio-economic realities which we cannot ignore. I mean, if we want to bring about innovation, we want to bring about technological improvement, we can't possibly lose sight of the conditions under which this can be made possible, and that requires a major focus on socio-economic realities which are, in a sense, creating an enormous amount of inertia. Now, the issue of inertia really lies across the board in dealing with climate change and the challenges it poses. And I want to mention what Lord Keynes said, which I thought was very pertinent. He said the difficulty lies not in the new ideas, but in escaping from the old ones. I think there's a huge inertia in the system, and we don't have the luxury of time in being able to live with that inertia. The last point I'd like to make is, what was said about nitrous oxide. 1/3 of it comes from anthropogenic or human related activities, and the bulk of it is from agriculture. Now, this is a greenhouse gas that we really need to look at very seriously, and technology would be the key. And therefore, research and development should not only look at traditional methods by which we can bring about changes in agriculture, but also those that would deal with a subject like this. The final point I'd like to make is that when we talk about socioeconomic issues, we forget the fact that there are 1.4 billion people in this world who have no access to electricity. A large number of them live in rural areas. So there's no such thing as cold chains in a large part of the developing world. So farmers who produce vegetables or fruits really have no choice. Either they are direct victims of the changes that take place in the market, or a lot of their produce actually perishes. Now, we need to use renewable sources of energy. This is where research and development can make a lot of difference. If through decentralized renewable energy-based systems we could create cold chains, it would improve the lot of farmers across the world. And this would give them higher incomes by which they can bring about technological change. So let's look at the entirety of the challenge and what it is that would really make sense in the future.
Excellent, thanks very much. If Louise doesn't mind, I'm going to put the first question up for voting so we can do parallel voting while you're speaking, if that's okay, Louise, if you don't mind. It's just, I'm very conscious that we have to be out of this room fairly soon. So we'll put the first question up and I'll just let people vote while you make your closing remarks, Louise, if you don't mind. Thank you.
Okay, well, this to me is not about farms. It's about the whole agricultural and food processing chain, and we shouldn't forget that. It is, in other words, about something we haven't even pronounced yet. It is also about the private sector, because a farmer is part of the private sector, and so are all the other bodies involved in processing our food and making sure it gets to our tables. So when we say intensification, it really is in the entire food chain, and I think it's the collaboration within that chain to reduce emissions, but also to be better on our water use, etc., that will make the difference. And that's where the action is very much also with the private sector. But citizens can indeed vote with their shopping cart and ask for products which have a clear indication of how they are produced. For government, because we're talking action, for governments this means that we need adequate legislation, but also adequate taxation regimes, for example, to reduce the VAT, the value-added tax, on products that are produced in a more sustainable way as compared to others. To me, it's amazing that we have one across-the-board taxation system and do not make a distinction between sustainability. And last but not least, science doesn't only need to be doing research. Science also needs to communicate. One of the real things that we haven't been able to get across to the public at large is that technology is the answer and that science is the answer. There is a kind of love affair of the middle classes in most temperate countries who believe that going back to the past, going back to some kind of a mythical, nostalgic past where everything was still beautiful and things were done by hand and farmers knew all their animals individually and looked at their crops in the evenings as the sun was setting, that's going to be the solution. Well, it is not, because nobody wants to be working that hard, and we need to have technology, but we have to have smart and good quality technology with less impact on the environment. And science needs to communicate that we can have the sense of belonging, but at the same time have the kind of technology that requires, or that is required from a food safety or from an environmental point of view.
Okay, thanks very much. And I'm going to give the final word to Pam Ronald. And I'd ask you, Pam, if you wouldn't mind, because we have a session coming in, if I could ask you to summarize in 2 minutes, I'd be very grateful. I'm sorry for rushing everybody, but we're to this very strict timetable because we've Bob Geldof coming in after us.
Thank you all, and thank you, Duncan Stewart, for your marvelous statement. And I think scientists do need to communicate. There's often fear of what scientists are doing, agricultural scientists, and I think it is important that we communicate what we're doing. And certainly citizens can act by
reducing food waste. So there are simple things that we can do. But I'd also like to make the point that we need to listen to farmers. It's very common on panels like this that there is no farmer. So I'm glad you brought in Eddie Oko. He was very profound and very clear. He's asking for new technologies, and he's using those technologies in an integrated system. And I think this is important to keep in mind, that any new technology, whether it's water management or new seed varieties, conventionally bred seed varieties, genetically engineered seed varieties, these varieties are always going to be needed to be used in an ecologically based system, an integrative type of management. And this is very important. And again, just to emphasize this intimate connection and to keep in mind the goals. Often in the public debate, you see some sorts of focus on how the seed was made, or whether it's local, or whether it's not. But really, we need to keep in mind the greater goals, is that we need to reduce harmful environmental inputs. The must be profitable for farmers. The farming system must be profitable for farmers. We do need to reduce energy consumption on farms. We need to reduce fertilizers, toxic pesticides. We need to foster soil fertility and biodiversity. And we need to use land and water very efficiently. And these are the greater goals that I think we can all agree on, and we can work together towards those goals.
Okay, thank you very much. Can I ask you just to hand in your voting machines to the end of the corridor? And now, Tommy Creachna Hanish, Guillaume Buicus Moore, Divsha Galer, Chachtan Shaw New, Conan Disporat Moore Shaw, Tommy on Buic Div, August Garbila Maigwiv, Divsha Freshen, Chachtan Shaw New, Tommy Creachna Hanish, Garbila Maigwiv Galer, August Slán, August Bannacht.